Everybody, welcome to the Town Hall special event. It just sounds so important. Today, we are talking about so you want to be an independent AT consultant. Uh, we have myself and Karen and Kelly. Beth said she would try to make it today, but Beth's coming off of a wedding this weekend. So as we can see, maybe she needs a little bit more time to regroup. And I'm sure it went awesome. Maybe she just needed a moment. So we'll trudge along without her, and she can always chime in next week or something like that when she joins us. So we have a loose plan as special events go. The loose plan is as loose as this index card in front of me. That's the looseness of the plan. But we do have three kind of big areas in talking to Karen and Kelly and Beth. We came up with three kind of big areas to talk about, and they were kind of business logistics, accounts and finances and managing the money part of a business, and then finally the how to get more business part of a business. And those have better titles when we talked about them, but that's ultimately what they were. Yeah, I was going to put them in slides, but I thought that it's better to see everybody's face, so I didn't. So instead, I'm going to try this move today. And as we go to each topic, I'm going to change my background and be fancy that way and use that like slides. Can you stand it? I don't even know. I should just hang up now. That's going to be the pinnacle of my day. Don't think I haven't had that open for the past half hour, just clicking through it to see what it looks like. And so that's how we'll do it. So Kelly emailed me this morning, which I thought was really great, because she emailed me the thing I had been thinking about how to start this, which is, why don't we give each person a chance to just say who they are, how they got into this, and being an independent consultant. And I added one more piece to it. That is, if you can think about, Kelly or Karen, what is the best thing about it and what is the most challenging thing about it? And who wants to go first?
Well, wait, you're an independent consultant too.
Yeah, I'm offering you up to go first. I'll put myself towards the end.
Kelly's the long timer here. Kelly
The
paved
long
the
hauler.
way.
Oh no, this is the second time I've been called old today.
Not old. I'm older, but Kelly, you set the stage. So why don't you get us going? Because we have so much to learn from you.
Oh golly, there's a scary item. Well, no, I love this topic because people ask me this a lot. You know, I want to be what you are when I grow up. Is often how the conversation gets started. I actually get started as a parapro. So I was a parapro in an Easter Seals multi-categorical preschool program, and was assigned to classrooms that had kids with multiple challenges. And in our program in Southeastern Philadelphia, we had the opportunity, being in Pennsylvania in the early 80s, were grants. And the state started statewide grants for technology, not individual students, but technology for the classroom. So our school ended up, our special ed coordinator had written a couple of these grants. So we ended up with computers. And honestly, I was the only person that wasn't afraid to touch it. So it's just, the other duties as assigned that we often talk about in town hall. So I started doing that as a part of my job, and it turned into the job. I went and got my master's in instructional technology at Johns Hopkins with a minor in rehab and special ed technology. And it wasn't called assistive technology then. And so I was an instructional media specialist for about 7 years at that program. And then I worked at a statewide job in Pennsylvania, which is now called PATAN. Then it was called the Pennsylvania Assistive Device Center. And we were split into 3 regions. So I had the responsibility for 201 school districts. So I went from kind of 5 schools to 201. At that point, I was not having hands-on kids. When I was still at Easter Seals, even though I was going around to 5 schools, I had a caseload of kids that were AT users, writing, OGCOM, reading tools, all of that. But when I went to work for the state, I could no longer legally work with individual kids in Pennsylvania. And so I found also that I kept an open practice for kids outside the state. So I'd go over to Jersey and work with kids. And I had a couple kids that were private school students that weren't allowed our services from the Assistive Technology Center. So I had those kids on my caseload, which of course they're now, 40 years old. I got Facebook friended by one of my kindergartners who's now 40. So yay. Yay me.
That's awesome.
Seasoned, not old, seasoned.
10 years. I worked at that project for 10 years. I did take somewhere in the middle of there. I should really only say I worked there 8 years because I took a 2-year sabbatical and started my PhD. I followed Dave Eddieburn to UW Milwaukee. And I loved all the classes, and I was not a good hoop jumper. Dave will tell you it in other terms. So I am an all but dissertation dropout doctoral student, and I ended up starting my own business instead. So I came back to Pennsylvania, did my time to repay my sabbatical time, and then left again and went to work for a grant. And one of the things that when people talk about going to independent consulting, always think it's great to have something that is a guarantee while you're, building your business. And so this is really the build of my business was while I was working at Penntech, I was also presenting in other states. I was presenting nationally. I was lucky that I had a boss that really encouraged us to go and present at Closing the Gap and CSUN and when ATIA started. And she really kind of pushed us that way. So when I was in graduate school, I just started growing that. As a graduate assistant, when I went back as a grant assistant, I only had 20 hours contracted. So I built the business the other 20 hours. And about 5 years of that, and I had enough clientele and enough things that I was a part of to go completely working for myself. So I've been doing that since 2005. Wow. And you roll with it. And certainly the pandemic impacted everything, and you just recreate yourself. Now I think all the rest of it, and so here I am. One of the things the pandemic brought me back to, and I am loving it, is I have online students. And so I've got 3 students. It's not a big caseload, but I have 3 students that I see twice a week. And I'm really enjoying being a teacher again and putting into practice all the things that we talk about that I can from my one part of their team. So other things will come out as we answer questions.
Yeah.
You answered the best thing. You want to answer the most challenging thing?
Oh,
or you want to wait?
The most challenging thing is invoicing. My most challenging thing is invoicing, contracts, and the never-ending search for the next gig.
Yes. Agreed. Okay. Nice. Good. Hold that thought. Excellent.
Kelly, it's fascinating hearing your story. I never heard it.
Well, this is
great. I lived in Philadelphia, late 70s, early 80s. So maybe but I wasn't. I was an occupational therapist. I worked at St. Agnes Hospital in the VA Medical Center. Is that when you were you in Philly at that time?
I was working at Philadelphia Easter Seals at that time. So, and we were just preschool. We weren't an Easter Seals that served all the age ranges because there were other services that did school age and adult services. So we just did preschool. But I got to meet a lot of people, even though, I had that full-time position. I got the chance to meet so many people because my kids were going out to every district. And so I got to meet people like Bill Ziegler. This will float your boat. Karen Kangas was my first AT consultant to my classroom. So there's a nice welcome smack in the face to,
hey,
that's great.
You can do this.
Wow.
That's too funny.
That's great.
All right, Karen, go ahead.
So my path was quite different from Kelly's. I'm an occupational therapist by background, and I was in medical, working in the medical area of OT. And then I moved back up to the Boston area. And my 5-year-old daughter, my oldest daughter at the time, was going into kindergarten, and they said, you know what, when her teacher found out that I was an OT, she said, you know, they really need an OT in Reading, you know, you should apply. So in my hometown, they basically just needed a warm body. So I took the position, started part-time, because then I had another 2 kids, and realized that schools, at least in my area, schools are making kids dependent on adults. And as an OT, Alyssa, I know you can relate, we're all about promoting independence. So it was quite disturbing to me to see how the education system was really making kids dependent on adults. And so I started playing around with technology, co-writer. I went into the schools in 1989. I got into co-writer in 1990, started getting into IntelliPix, all the IntelliTool stuff, and got so excited by it all. And I said, okay, technology is the way. This is going to make the difference. I remember actually the very first student that I ever worked with, it was probably 1990, the green screens, the Apple IIe, and it was a phonics program, but I worked on it with him to help reduce his impulsivity, to kind of teach him, you know, like, wait, let's stop, let's look at the choices and then choose. So I didn't care about the phonics. I just wanted to help give him an activity that he loved, using technology in a way that would help him just stop and scan the screen, and then to reduce impulsivity. So then I was like, this is the 1990s. I need a graduate program that offers assistive technology, and there wasn't anything. And then I met Mads Pugliese at a MassQ conference in November, and I'll never forget it because she was exactly the program I was looking for. So I was in the very first assistive technology program through Simmons, and graduated the very first class. There were 10 of us. And during that 1989 to 2001 period, we had 8 special ed directors in my town. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that. And the last one was so bad. I'm like, I'm done. I can't work in this town anymore. So at that point, I ended up going out on my own. And I can't even remember, this was back in 2001, 2002. I honestly don't even remember. I remember my first client, but I don't remember how it even happened. It kind of evolved. One of the things that's different about our area compared to other states, each town is its own entity, its own its own public school district. So school districts can't afford to hire their own AT consultant or their own AT personnel, like Alyssa is, and others like Leslie is, and Hillary was in her district. But there's not, every town can't afford it. So I started getting my name out there, and districts started to hire me to do the AT, excuse me, especially the AT evaluations, which hopefully now we're getting more districts to move towards the consultation and coaching model first. And now we're in about 50 different districts in the greater Boston area. And I have 5 women that work with me. 2 of them are AAC consultants, and the other 4 of us are working in AT for learning and instruction, and we cover everything. And, we speak all over, and we co-author books with great people. And, but the big thing, I think what has helped me to be successful in this area is the way that public education is designed in Massachusetts. I don't know if that would work as well in other states, but it has worked very effectively for us here. You talk about, I love what I do. I love what I do. I always say we want to work ourselves out of a job. It's not happening. In fact, we're busier than ever. But it's just so fun to just go in and support teams, facilitate the process, help kids to be independent, to move that inclusive mindset. Let's move away from making kids prompt dependent. The thing I'm most excited about, I've got 2 schools for kids who are on the autism spectrum, which is a big business here in Massachusetts. We've got multiple schools. They both have hired us to do consulting to them because they want to expand what they're doing beyond the beyond just the BCBA approach. They, you know, they want to start thinking about AT, not just for reward, technology, not just for reward and reinforcement, but they're actually starting to think about AT for learning and instruction, which is so amazing.
Awesome.
And I second Kelly. Yeah, the invoicing, especially where there's 6 of us and we're so busy, the invoicing is a nightmare.
Yeah. It's so interesting too, because Kelly's story and my story are similar in that we are kind of one-person shops. And Karen's is different in a sense that Karen has people that work for her. Karen has a staff that she hired, which I think is a great kind of alternate perspective on some of these things too, which I think is great. I'll start with the most frustrating or the most challenging thing. I will echo everything that Kelly and Karen said. Invoicing. That is really, it's a bit of a nightmare for me. It doesn't go well a lot. I have a hard time with that. I always like to point out, if my wife was here, she would laugh at me because she is my accountant for my business. And she will frequently say things like, "Hey, how are those invoices going?" And I'm like, yeah, that's definitely, it's on my list. And then she'll make a list and that just says invoices on it and leave it on my desk. And I'm not good at that. So yeah, that is the most challenging for sure. It's interesting. My story is similar to Kelly's. And it's funny when I thought about starting this whole idea of being independent in 2014, Kelly was the person that I talked to. Kelly and I have done a lot of training for a lot of years together. And you know, I started out similarly to Kelly in a sense that I was working in a program I started out, if you don't know my story, I don't come from education. Oh, that sounds weird to say. I am educated, I guess, but I didn't come from the education field. I'm an engineer by training. And so when I finished my engineering degree, I couldn't find an engineering job. My mother worked at a center for people with physical disabilities, a cerebral palsy center close to us, who was looking for a wheelchair person. Fix wheelchairs. We have a room filled with wheelchair parts. We have a whole center filled with people who break wheelchairs. We need somebody who's going to put those 2 things together. And so my first introduction to AT was in a shop fixing wheelchairs. And then over time, as the field kind of evolved, this was also in 1989. So when Karen mentioned 89, I thought that's funny. That's my same year as well. In 1989, it was really wheelchairs. But then as we saw computers and AAC got more complex and more involved, I kind of grew into the field as it continued to evolve and become a little more high tech. And over time, just continued to work in those kind of jobs and kind of found a path along this way to provide AT support in those types of centers. And then moved to a statewide position in New Jersey, working at the UCP of New Jersey, where we would go out and we had large contracts. We would go out across the state. But might have been my favorite job before this being on my own, in that we had a giant box truck with tools in the back, and it was a rolling workshop. And I would just pull up to a school or a center, and I would meet with the team, and they would describe the struggles that the student was having. And I would take a bunch of notes, and then I'd do this cool kind of like, "I'll be back." And I'd go out to the parking lot, and you pull the door down, and it was fully electric. It had all power tools in it, and the truck would like kind of rock, and all these tools would run, dust would shoot out from under the doors, and you'd open the door and you'd have this thing, whatever this thing might be that the student could need. And we were able to deliver those pieces to students in real time as they needed them, for no cost, because it was covered under our grants from the state, which was always the greatest thing. Where people are like, "Oh, like, how much do I owe you?" And they're looking for money. And you're like, "Well, you don't owe me anything. This is all covered. The state, it's a grant, it's magic." And so that was a really cool thing. And then as I continued to evolve as a practitioner, I found that going to conferences and presenting and doing other types of work was really exciting. And going to seem kind of crappy, and I am recording it. I don't feel like I was getting the support I wanted from the place I was at. How about that? That's about as polite as I can be. I was not receiving the support I expected. And so I started to look for ways to go out on my own and find these opportunities to do these kinds of things. I guess I was an AT maker before it was cool. Yeah, before the stuff looked really cool. It was, oh man, I could find you some pictures. It would be great. But yeah, so ultimately I slowly started to work towards being independent, and then finally came to that tipping point of I either have to be all in independent or give up the dream and just stay at the job I'm at. I was at that kind of moment. And that moment for me happened when I realized I had run out of vacation time and sick time and personal time because I was taking those days to go do other things. And then I was like, all right, well, I either have to do it or not. And so I decided to do it. And I have to say it was probably the best thing ever. So when I think the best thing about being independent consultant, it is the whole idea of being an independent consultant, doing things that you find interesting, taking on projects that kind of get you jazzed up, which I think is really exciting. I've already told you the most challenging, which is invoicing. So hire me. You might not have to pay me for a while. I just won't even invoice. I'll just forget to. But I do. And as we transition to our couple topics here, I purposely have this up on the slide behind me because it's a quote that I have up. If I didn't have my virtual background up, I would be pointing at it right now. It's a quote that lives on my wall behind my desk. And I found it online, and it just really kind of encapsulated my thought of how to be an AT consultant. And it says, your smile is your logo. Your personality is your business card. How you leave others feeling after an experience with you becomes your trademark. And I just thought that's just really cool. That just kind of gives us a nice summation of that. So that is my story as well. So there's all of us. Now you know what you're getting. Here's some things that we can talk about. The logistics. We'll talk about the fun stuff first. No, not really the fun stuff. But this is the stuff that matters as we start thinking about it. So some of our topics here for discussion, and Kelly, Karen, you can jump off on anyone you want. It's fine. A business plan. How do you incorporate yourself? Liability insurance. How do you avoid burning bridges? And how do you keep the awareness of your professional license in the front of your brain as you do things? And so what do you guys want to talk about first?
None of this business stuff.
Yeah, right. I agree. It's so funny when you think about a business, and I would often say, well, I didn't want to be a business person. I wanted to be an AT consultant.
Yeah.
I want to just do things, but ultimately you have to know and have things aligned.
Yeah. For me, it just evolved, and I started out as an LLC, but then as I got busier, I needed to change to an S Corp. Mm-hmm. And as I brought people on, and no business plan, it just kind of evolved. It just,
I have to admit, even when I wrote that, I laughed. I was like, I don't really have a business plan either. I'm like, oh, well, that sounds cool. That doesn't sound cool. Those are my business plan. But I thought maybe you two were more involved than me. I don't know.
I don't have a business plan either. And so that first one, I was like, oh, well, I missed a big step. I did, though, choose not to go the LLC or the incorporated route. When I was in that half-time 20 hours as, working at the university and the 20 hours starting on my own, I spent a lot of time talking to Don Johnston. And Don talked to me about, what would throw you into wanting to be an LLC? Like, are you going to sell anything? And those types of things. And I interested in making things to sell. I wasn't in a situation where I could bring other people on board with me. And so I've stayed a sole proprietor all of this time.
Yeah. And I am an LLC. Just as my accountant told me, he said the LLC gives you just 1 degree of separation between you personally and your business activities. And when I was starting this, I met with my accountant to explain what I was about to do. he didn't seem overly thrilled at the time, but I think it's okay now. He was like, "Are you sure? I don't know." I'm like, yeah, it should be fun. But he had said to me at the time, "Do you ever envision a time where you might have to not necessarily hire somebody, but take people on and pay them in some way?" And at that point, it was all rainbows and roses. And I was like, well, yeah, that's definitely what I'm going to do. It's going to be amazing. I'm totally going to do that. And he's like, all right, well, then we should do this then, this LLC, just to kind of give you that, that barrier between your personal finances and the business. And I could see how Karen would make that jump too with the employees as you go forward.
Yeah.
And I do have, like, my money is all separate. So I have separate accounts that are just the business side. And then, you know, what I'm doing with my home. So I go through the process of paying myself. So, you know, from my business account to my home account. So money, it gets exchanged every month between those two.
Yeah.
To keep that all separated.
Yeah, I do the same thing. So any money now comes into a business checking account that then I get paid out of. So there is a documentation flow of where that money went, both for being saved for quarterly taxes as well as being paid out for me for pay of what I do. Do you both have liability insurance? I'm sure you do.
Definitely. Yeah. Liability, I have to have workers' comp. Yes, I have to have all the insurances. Yeah, they're protections. And I mean, that was the big thing about going the S Corp too, especially as I expanded. The tax advantages and the protections were really important.
Yeah, I have liability insurance too. Most of the contracts I sign with schools or agencies, you have to show $1 million liability policy. My policy is through CEC. You know, I'm a teacher, so I'm a member of the Council for Exceptional Children. And so I was able to get into a group deal that way.
Yeah, mine is through a company called Forrest T. Jones.
Yeah, that's
and I did that because I was an ISTE member. I could get a discount because of being an ISTE member. And same thing. I think if anything, that logistics piece of insurance is being aware of what your limits are on your insurance and being prepared to up them if you need to, depending on the contract. I was also at a level where it was 1 million. And then I went for a contract that required it to be higher, required 3 million. And so I had to up my whole insurance and just kind of keep that active to make sure that I was meeting the necessities of what the grant was requiring. So, you know, depending how you move forward with your work may dictate what you need to do, and just be keeping aware of that.
I also, Karen, I don't know what you do for your people. I also have a disability insurance package.
That I don't have. I don't. Huh. I don't have a disability. I don't have disability insurance as I get older.
Much higher rate than liability.
Yeah, I feel like I'm paying enough for
Somewhere in Boston, 5 different cars just skidded to a stop, and they're all making their way back to the office right now.
Yeah, no, that's something I don't have, but
I don't have that either.
Yeah, but
great. Now I don't have that.
I know. Now wait, you know, I've got workers' comp, liability. Yeah, there's something else, but I don't know. Yeah, the one thing
the idea of this conversation, and you're getting a good sense of that. Even though we were willing to be these panel members, I don't know that any of us have it all figured out anyway. And I know I'm constantly learning things about this as I go too, and changing my practice.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's constant evolution. And I have to admit, none of the districts have ever asked me to prove, to show my liability insurance policy. It's never been asked in all these years.
That's really surprising. It's a standard on our school district contract that you have to submit when you're doing any work. And other places I've been have asked for mine.
Yeah.
I think you just lucked out, Karen.
Never been asked. They all ask for the Corey and the fingerprint. Well, not all of them do, but they do. Some of them ask for the Corey and the fingerprint, but nobody has ever asked for proof of liability insurance.
Yeah, I'm surprised too, Karen. I would think with like Alyssa, I get asked about that quite a bit, to the point where I have like the proof of insurance just saved as a PDF on my phone. And if I'm there talking to somebody, I can email it to them as we're sitting there. just like, oh yeah, sure, I have that. Interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. I've never encountered that, but who knows? Maybe next week it'll come up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How about these other two on this slide? Anything you want to jump and start? The avoid burning bridges.
Always. That's huge, especially in this area, because there's revolving doors of directors of student services. It's a revolving door. They go from one town to another, then they bring you there. And you never, ever burn bridges, ever, because you don't know who you'll be working with again. And that's a really important point to consider. You're representing your company, you're representing the future, and you always have to be aware of your actions.
Yeah.
And you need to learn to know when to walk away, like, and how to walk away.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that isn't anything I've had to encounter, at least in terms of local districts. So, because I know my clientele is different, Kelly, from yours. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that is challenging for me is when parents call up and they want to hire me. And I'm like, I really don't want you to have to pay out of pocket. Please go through your school system. Because I don't want anyone to have to pay out of pocket because they're entitled to this. And I've been hired many times to do a secondary independent evaluation because the first one wasn't as effective as it could have been. And again, you don't want to burn bridges. So, you just,
Well, I mean, Karen brings up a good point. You do get in that situation where, lost my train of thought, where, you need to go in gently. And when families contact you and want to hire you outright, I find that the same as Karen was talking about, trying to push people towards, you need to get me through your school district. And it's also because my background's as an educator, I also don't have families don't have those medical reimbursements that they can get for people who have backgrounds as SLPs and OTs and PTs. But I find that even the period of time that it takes for that to happen in a contract where the school district is finding out about you and interviewing you, that sometimes helps to bring together the school with the family when maybe there was a difference of opinion between those two entities. And so one of the things that helps to start to mend that, not in every situation, but in most that I've been in, is to get yourself contracted through the school or the agency.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what rings out for me, and this one is very unique to the situation I'm in, is that I also have a job in addition to being an independent consultant. And so my job is at the state level here as our ATAC director in New Jersey. And as part of that, when I started that job, which in the beginning was a small part-time job, I think it was 16 hours a week is how it started. And when I started that, I had an understanding with the individuals who were my bosses at the ATAC that I was an independent consultant also. And that's the reason I only took 16 hours a week. And we had to have a conversation about, well, if you're acting as the director of our state's ATAC project, how appropriate is it for you to be consulting in state, doing things that are AT related? And we came to the conclusion it wasn't very realistic at all, and it's really not appropriate at all. And so in the beginning, when I was only 16 hours, we had agreed that I would keep the clients I had prior to the job, and that was fine. I could not take any additional work. But what I found was as the pandemic started and my consulting activities dropped down to almost zero, I had to increase that job accordingly to kind of make up the difference to where now I am dangerously close. And Naomi's probably laughing behind her camera there. I'm dangerously close to full time right now. I'm what's right underneath what we consider full time, which still allows me to do consulting works and allows me to be flexible in my time that I use at the ATAC. But because of that uptick in hours, I have since eliminated all of my consulting in New Jersey, even the individuals who I had been working with before. And so I had found them different people to serve them, and felt like that was a better way to go. So yeah, it's about understanding your professional, where you're at professionally, and understanding the responsibilities. Natalie, I saw your question, Natalie. Your question is the question that everybody might want to ask. I don't know how comfortable people are going to be saying their rates, but I'll answer your question first in a very broad sense. Those fees are both hourly at times and by project, and it does depend on what the person's asking for. And like anything else, fees go down the more work there is. So if you say to me, I want you for one day, it's a certain number. But if you say, oh, well, we'll make that 4 days across the school year, well, that number drops then. And it just adjusts accordingly. I don't know what Karen or Kelly you want to even say about that. Yeah. Kelly turned her mic off. That tells you how little Kelly wants to talk about it.
No, I have a 3-year-old here who's having a bit of a fit. So
it's okay.
She's not happy out there at lunch right now.
The one thing, it's similar to what Mike said. The one thing too is when you're asked to do an IEE in Massachusetts, there's a rate setting rate in, and I'm sure this is the same in other states as well. And it is so incredibly low that I will say, no, I don't take it. Yeah. And fortunately, every time the district has agreed to pay what my rate is. I think that the rate in for an independent AT eval is something like $680 or $780 for the eval. And our fees for evaluation cover everything: record review, parent interview, working with the student, writing up the assessment, as well as attendance at the IEP meeting to discuss the report, because we really believe that. And it also includes one follow-up consultation, because we believe that those things are imperative to ensure effective follow-up and implementation.
So I'm like Mike, I've got an hourly rate in person, I have an hourly rate webinar, I have a half-day rate, I have a whole day rate. And as the days get, if it's a contracted series of trainings, that might have a project rate to it. Some of the company work, so I do consulting with companies as well. And so they usually have kind of their outside consultant rate. And so then I try to negotiate from that, because talk about low, those are really low. They're like half what I get paid hourly for a student. Some of my student consults, I'm doing all implementation in my consults, or direct teaching. And so they get set by whatever decision has happened between the family and the school. That's given a family sometimes a chunk of money that they pay outside consultants out of, or I'm doing the contract directly with the school district. I'm not an AT person that does an assessment. I mean, I don't have a whole team of people like Karen. So my AT assessment help is coaching the local team through the process. So that becomes a longer process than here's one chunk for me doing the AT assessment for you.
Yeah, I think
going back to Kelly's question, Kelly, I know that what is it, SCORE or SHINE, the retired, what do they call those retired business professionals that will help you? I think it's a SHINE project. I know I didn't use it, but if you're considering starting your own practice in the Austin area, there are definitely organizations that offer free business help to get started.
Yeah, I think that's a great plan.
I think it's through, is it called SCORE and SHINE? I can't remember what those acronyms stand for.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Whenever someone reaches out, and what kind of brought this whole topic up is people reaching out and asking questions, I think the part that all of us struggle with the most is setting a rate and finding that spot that makes sense, given the who your project is with, or with your contract is with, or whatever, and what you feel like you deserve. And I don't know if Kelly remembers saying this to me, but I'm going to give her credit for this. When I started, Kelly was the person, as we were talking about rates, Kelly, this is a good thing, who said to me, never apologize for your rate. Your expertise has value. And so when you set that, you can certainly be flexible. And that doesn't mean I'm not flexible. I'm flexible all the time. In fact, I just did that on Friday with a group that I really wanted to work with. And I was like, oh, that sounds really fun. And they're like, well, we can't do this. And then we had a lot of back and forth. Well, what about this? And if we do these other things and we add this other value into it, and we found a point that worked for all of us. It will work for my contract administrator who lives in my house with me. It'll work for me, and it worked for them. And it still valued the expertise that I thought I brought to them. And I don't know, that's the one thing that's always stuck in my head, Kel, is that moment of like, just don't apologize for it. It's kind of like own it, own that a little bit. You'll know if it's too much because you won't get any work.
Oh, well,
yeah. And that's one thing I'm always concerned about. Are we pricing ourselves out of the area, out of the market? And it doesn't appear that way, because it is hard. I do try to find out what, like, Easter Seals is charging for Naval, or an hourly rate, and other local people. It's kind of hard because no one really does share that information, but sometimes you can surreptitiously discover what other people are
you can get it sometimes from people one-on-one. And that's what I did when I was asking people that were national presenters and people that were doing other kinds of contract work that had the same background as I did, because I thought that was another important part that laid into it. I will say that there are people in the assistive technology field that watch for being undercut. And if they happen to find out your rates, you might get, questioned about that. And then you just stand your ground. And that's the part of the not apologizing. Yeah. When Scott Morphilius and I were opening up independently almost about the same time, and there were people in the field that went after us for what our rates were. And we tried to point out to them is that we were just getting started, that, plus we wanted to work. I didn't want to do just one job a month. There are other people that price themselves that way so that they don't have to do as much traveling. But of course, then we were 3 cities a week when we got started. Get on an airplane Sunday night, not come back till Saturday morning. And, other jumpers in there. So it was a lot for the first 10 years or so. But yeah, you've got to set what you feel comfortable with and what you feel valued with, and then just stick to it.
Yeah. So Kelly, interesting. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So Kelly, people were saying that your prices were too low when you first started out.
Without saying names, we would get hit up individually. So we would be at national conferences, and it was like there was a group of people that had decided, let's go after Kelly and Scott and their rates. And they would come up to us. And it was hard because they were really important people in the field. And I didn't want to burn bridges with them. So Scott and I just kind of stuck together with it. But one person would go talk to him and somebody would talk to me. And, then Scott and I would talk together and be like, well, maybe we'll look at a little bit of a rate hike next year, but never to, people that were out presenting 10, 20 years longer than we were.
Right. Kelly, would you like to use the last 13 minutes to out those people? I mean, I'm happy to shut down my background and just let it ride.
I will tell you guys, it was tough. And, and I've encountered that too. When, there are some unspoken things that happen. And so, like when I went and to be a pod trainer, And I decided that was when I was starting going from half-time to full-time, I knew I needed some other things, certifications behind me. So I looked into it, but I asked the people that were doing it if they wanted somebody else in and around them, because I didn't want it looking like I was taking their business. Yeah, AT is a very small group, although it seems like there's a lot of us. It's still a very small group, and well, I think I'm always in the position of we need to be helping each other, and not competing. And I think one of Mike's slides is, we throw business to each other a lot. I had a potential contractor call on Friday, and they were asking me about all of these trainings, and it seemed like I was going to do all of their professional development for next school year, where maybe in the past I might have been like, yeah, I'll do it. But I'm like, some of the things that you're talking about are things, have you ever heard of Mo Booty? And Mo's really doing that kind of work. And so maybe she and I can work together and do some things that way. And you get a little bit of a broader, view on it all.
I think it's interesting, Kellen. I did add that to the slide when you brought that up, because I think that's it's really important, that idea of working with others. And I think part of that, I know for me, adds to the fun of a project. Instead of being that singular person, but and finding others that their expertise level and how they are complementary to what you have, and being able to bring that together into a project. And ultimately, the person who's paying you gets a better product at the end. Because of that. And, like Karen and Kelly have both said, there certainly does not seem to be a shortage of work. I mean, there's, I think one of the things that happens as you continue on this process is you can get to a point where you can say no to things that they just don't grab you. And again, sometimes not apologizing for that either. I had that a couple of weeks ago where someone had a project that sounded fun, but it sounded like a lot. And I just didn't have the time. I knew I wouldn't have the time. I just knew it. And so we had a meeting, and I said, thank you, but I just don't think this is right for me right now. And I could give you some other people who you might want to reach out to and ask. And they said, well, no, we really wanted to work with you. And I said, I just don't really know that I don't have the space for this right now. It's much too much. If there was a very small part of this that you thought would fit, well, then that would be great. Otherwise, I just have to push this to somebody else. I just think it makes more sense. I think it's interesting. I feel like the pandemic changed my approach to this a little bit too. I think I realized more. Well, I realized during the pandemic how much travel I was doing before the pandemic. And then I realized I don't really like doing that anymore. I don't really want to do that. I'm not interested in that. And so I've started to look for different types of consulting and started to change a bit of what that looks like. And like Hillary says, just not saying yes to everything. And that's not to say that there won't be a point where maybe you do say yes to everything. In the very beginning, if we had this conversation in 2015, when I was just starting, I would have said yes to every single thing.
Yeah.
And I had to at that point. But then as it continued on, I realized that that doesn't make sense, because then you're also not delivering a great product all the time, and then that starts to weigh on you. I don't like that. I don't want to say yes and give someone half a project or crappy work. I'd rather just say, no, you should really talk to this person, and maybe they'll be a much better match for you.
And be ready for projects to fall apart. I mean, you might put a lot of time into planning and project development and everything, things like it's going to move forward, and then the funding falls out, or other things happen with people's bosses, and Karen talked about director changes, and that changes everything with your interaction with that agency.
Yeah. And so you may end up taking a lot of meetings with people and not seeing something happen from that right away. That doesn't mean it won't. I could give you a very positive I had somebody that I had a meeting with 2 years ago, and I had actually forgotten about this meeting we had. And they reached back out last month, and they want to go forward with the project. And I was sitting there looking at the email saying, what project are we talking about? This is exciting, I guess. And I had to go back in and find their emails from before to remember what this project was. But it took them 2 years to lock in the funding and get people on their administrative team to buy into it to where we could start, which is great. I think it's exciting, but it also meant that we did have to meet and kind of reevaluate what our thought process was, because what we thought we were going to do 2 years ago was not necessarily what we were going to do now. So we did have to revise. But it's important. It's important. You never know when those leads are going to come to fruition, which is kind of fun.
So just thinking about this whole conversation today, I think you're getting kind of a very a well-rounded experience, because what Kelly's doing and what Mike's doing and what we're all doing something unique. I feel like Kelly and Mike are more in the national level. They're change at a national level, even though they work individually as well in school districts. Mm-hmm. But I'm doing more locally. So hopefully, you know, if you've got any questions about that could be directed to any of us, because we are offering different experiences. So
I will say money-wise is make sure you've got yourself about a 6 month, you know, at least.
Yes.
In the bank, because people do not pay as regularly as when you were used to getting your paycheck.
No,
right?
I agree. If there's one thing I tell everyone who starts thinking about this, I always say to them, if you did work today, do not expect to be paid for months.
Yeah. So
can you do that? If you can do that, if you're prepared for that, well, then great. It takes a long time.
There are different billing cycles in every agency,
right?
You know, and if you're invoicing the day after their monthly school district meeting, board meeting, you're waiting at least another month to get back onto the, you know, the payment committee. Yeah.
This has been the most challenging year for me in meeting payroll, because my staff, they start in September and they need to get, you know, they need payment right away. And so if you do start up a business, you know, try to get that business line of credit as well at the same time as when you open up your bank account, because that will really help you through those challenging times. So a ton of money comes in July from all those June invoicing all the year, but sometimes I don't get enough money until December, and it's really kind of, I think those swings are really important to recognize.
Yeah. And finding a way to mitigate that and kind of smooth those edges a bit. And I know I'm working on a contract. I thought Jen might be here today with Jen Savage, and we started a contract in July and did not receive our first payment until November, right before Thanksgiving. And we did a lot of work, and a lot of money got put out to get a project running that had no return on that money for almost 5 months. So that's rough.
Yeah, some of my billing is quarterly, some of it is monthly, some of it is by job, and that all gets negotiated in the contract.
So how do you keep track of that, Kelly?
Oh my gosh, I have a really specific Excel spreadsheet that's now kind of lined up with TurboTax so that I can immediately put each section just as the questions come up in TurboTax. But I keep a red line. I have, what you can't see behind my desk is who I'm waiting to be paid from. And then I've got another list of who I need to invoice. And that's just in a constant flow, and it's just right in my line of sight over the computer monitor.
Yeah.
I have those in a spreadsheet also. I have pages of a spreadsheet, and then I also when a contract gets agreed upon and in there it specifies the payment cycle, I instantly take those payment dates and drop them into my calendar as tasks and say, make sure you invoice on this day, your payment is due by this day. And I put all those in so I can see them, because I'm of that mentality of if it's not in my calendar, it just doesn't exist. And so I might not look at that spreadsheet every day, but I'll look at my calendar every day. And so I make sure I drop those things in there.
See, I use an online company for payroll and invoicing. And so I know exactly how much I'm waiting for, who's overdue. So that, but it doesn't help me in terms of who I need to remember to send the invoice out to. I use a Google spreadsheet for that.
I do as well.
And for payroll.
Yeah. I have a spreadsheet that manages my contracts and invoices. And then I have a separate one that manages all my business expenses for the year, broken down into different categories that my accountant has told me he would like these numbers in.
So
big expenses, little expenses, those kinds of
So
things.
it's almost time to end. I just hope, I mean, to me, this really is the best job ever because of the flexibility. We serve such an important role in facilitating and promoting the use of inclusive technology that all learners need. I mean, it's the best job.
Yeah.
And so I hope other people are getting excited about, nobody in the greater Boston area, please, but any other parts of the country, go for it.
I would welcome you in the New Jersey area. Please join me. It's fine. It's okay.
And reach out. I mean, I love to share about this and getting started. And again, I'm glad we all admitted we didn't start with a business plan. It just kind of evolved. It happened.
My plan was to be independent. That was my plan. And then I worked from there and figured it out. But like Karen says, if you are thinking about this, you feel free to reach out to us. I mean, I won't say who I've spoken to, but I've spoken to people in our field about this because I think it helps to just have a conversation. And these are very personal conversations. But I mean, if you're looking for some direction or some feedback on your plan, I'm always happy to chat with people about that and help you move forward. I would like to see it be easy for people to do this if this is what you're looking to do. Well, look at that. 1 o'clock on the dot. And I don't mind saying my background's worked perfectly. I'm pretty psyched for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well done, Mike.
I might do that from now on, actually, instead of running slides. I might do that in a way. It's kind of
Can
cool.
your arm get all the way up back to your back to pat yourself on the back?
I have a special back
No.
patter.
Reach.
It's next to my desk. It's a
Okay.
hand on a stick, and I can just go like this and just really very casual. Yeah.
Just check in.
I need to say goodbye. I have a student in my Zoom room.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye, Kelly.
Bye, Kelly.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Remember, next week, now that Kelly's gone, I should have had her give it a plug once before she left. Next week on the 18th, we have the members of the Quiet Leadership Team coming in. They want to lead a discussion on assistive technology in the IEP. So we'll see them next Monday. All right, everybody. It was a pleasure as always.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good week, everybody.
Bye.